Well, certainly this COVID pandemic is forcing Canada to take a hard look in the mirror. With countries scrambling to secure enough vaccines, our next guest believes this should be a lesson to all of us and an opportunity to focus on innovation. Dan Breznitz is the co-director of the University of Toronto's Innovation Policy Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Dan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with your reaction to the news out of Europe that EU member states can impose export controls on vaccines leaving their countries. That may, and I emphasize the word may, have an impact on vaccine supplies in this country. So what's your reaction to that?
That we should have expected that. It was clear that this was going to happen. As a matter of fact, nothing in what has happened in the last year should come as a surprise. We all knew what will be the end game with this pandemic. We all knew it's going to be vaccines. And we all knew that there are going to be problems if you don't secure supply and if you don't have a capability of manufacturing basic needs, from masks, ventilators to vaccines. And here we are.
Here we are, but you know, when the pandemic began, it's not as if a manufacturing capacity in great amounts for vaccines was in this country to begin with. So what should the government have done? Should have things been different from your point of view?
Things should have been different, not just for vaccines. I think what the pandemic, if you want to look at it as a positive way, what the pandemic has done is put a mirror right here. And we now look at the mirror and we're not happy, or at least we shouldn't be happy, because we were complicit and we have lost many capabilities for our basic needs, from PPE to now vaccines, to our ability to innovate around them. And this is a wake-up call. By the way, we are not the only one. The US had the same wake-up call. What I'm worried about is that our leaders for the last 12 months have basically played in order not to lose. They haven't really tried to win. Okay. And as a country, we do need to realize that we have to have basic production capabilities.
Okay, let me focus in on production capabilities on vaccines right now, though, because that seems to be very much what's at issue today, and given what's happening with the European Union. And I think a bit of history is worthwhile here. Why did this country stop producing its own vaccines? Because there was a time when Canada was a global leader when it came to vaccines.
For the same reason we have started to produce, stop to produce a lot of stuff. The world has become more and more globalized. And in the case of production, it means that you can cut into small stages what you produce. And a lot of the actual production, what we call manufacturing, has been moved overseas in order to save money. The problem is that once you start losing those capabilities, it is very hard, or at least quite complicated, to bring them back. We could have taken a much bolder action in the beginning of a vaccine. Just think for a moment how much our economy loses every day and says, this is essential. We are going to cut a deal with the vaccine makers, but we are also going to create a shared facilities for vaccine production in this country. And anyone who's going to produce our vaccines also have to use at least partly that production facility that we will supply to all of them. Because it was clear that no private actor would do it. And yet, we haven't.
Okay, to that, I want to bring in a statement. And this is something that you wrote for Policy Options. And in that article that you wrote, you say the following, quote, Canada's innovation performance has been weak for decades. Despite success in educating highly skilled and creative people, generating world-class research and producing new ideas, Canadian firms have not been able to draw on these strengths to develop and commercialize new products, services, and processes. So, given what you just said about vaccines, given what you wrote in Policy Options, what role can the government actually play in improving the situation right now?
Right now, a lot what I would think that this pandemic has shown us, that there are certain critical capacities to produce that a modern economy must have. And that's one. The second, we cannot rely on our allies, not the US, not the EU. And we need to understand what are the capabilities that we must have to produce and make sure that we have them. Okay, that's one. In terms of innovation, we have a serious problem. For the last 15 to 20 years, every year you see business, government investment in R&D, innovation is actually growing or at least stagnating. It's a private business that thinks that if you invest in R&D and innovation in Canada, you're not going to make money. And until we solve that, which is regulatory, which is business perception, every dollar that the government spent actually does not create a leverage, more spending by the private industry. That's a systemic problem of our private business sector that we need to fix.
Does that mean a crown corporation then?
I would say that one of the biggest problems is we need to institutionalize and systemize our innovation policy. Right now, every time it's a buzzword, we hear about it in one annual budget and then it disappears. Innovation policy, vaccine R&D, those are things that takes years. I think it behooves us to have either an agency or a crown corporation with a budget which does not depend on politicians, but works on this year after year for the benefit of all Canadians and our society.
Well, Dan, the start of a conversation which I'm glad to have with you today. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael.
You take care. That is Dan Breznitz, the co-director of the University of Toronto's Innovation Policy Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy.